The next period of medieval art is the Romanesque period. The term Romanesque means in the Roman manner. The term was coined in the early 19th century, and the term applies to all of the arts of the mid-11th and late 12th centuries, even though much of the art reflected multiple sources. So while we call it Romanesque, and that kind of suggests that it is Roman-influenced art, most of the art in this period actually reflected Roman art, Byzantine art, Islamic art, and early medieval European art. At the beginning of the 11th century, Europe was still divided into many small political and economic units, ruled by powerful families. By the end of the 12th century, the regions around Paris began to form the nation of France. In the 11th century, England becomes a nation. So we're starting to see some modern day sort of nations start to build up during this period. Germany and northern Italy had their own local rulers, but the Holy Roman Empire was trying to get them under their rule. Towns and cities gained in importance, but Europe still remains an agricultural society, with land as the primary source of wealth. From 1095 to 1099, Christian Europe, at the call of Pope Urban II, went to the aid of the Byzantine Emperor to save the Holy Land from the Muslims. This was called a crusade to retake Jerusalem and the Holy Land. During the Crusades, Westerners encountered the more sophisticated material culture of the Islamic world and the Byzantine Empire. In their travels and warfare, they end up bringing back a lot of goods from the East, and this actually increases trade in the 11th and 12th centuries. The increase in trade promotes growth of cities and the growth of an urban class of merchants and artisans. Western scholars rediscovered many classical Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved for centuries in Islamic Spain and the Eastern Mediterranean, but the rest of Europe hadn't really had access to them. The increase in financial resources and the relearning of lost arts helps the art flourish during this period. This is the period when the first universities were established. The 11th and 12th centuries were a period of great building activity in Europe. Castles, manor houses, churches, and monasteries arose everywhere. This increased prosperity made the resources available to build on a large scale. Christians have the desire to glorify Christ and his saints. And this sort of zeitgeist or spirit of the age actually increases during this period. So people are even more dedicated to Christianity than perhaps they were before, or at least on a large motivated building scale. Buildings also start to promote local pride. This means that, say you're living in, this one town, and you want your church to be the biggest and best and way better than the next guy's town. So people start to have kind of pride in their towns and therefore pride in their churches. The basic form of Romanesque church follows the early plans of Christian basilicas, but Romanesque builders made several key changes. One of the things they did is they widened the projecting transepts. And remember, that's actually these parts right here. So here's the transepts. So they widen these transepts, and they add complex sanctuaries with ambulatories. So you can see these ambulatories right here. They also expand the chapels, which provides space for additional altars and relics, and helps accommodate the crowds of worshipers. They add these tall towers here to the western facade. And this marks the church as the most important building in the community. The western facade with these towers, in part, is based on the traditional fortified gateways. And it's meant to be sort of a metaphor representation of the entrance into the church is the gateway to paradise. They also add stuff like additional ribs. They add masonry buttresses and reinforced walls at critical points. And they also add a tympanum. We'll look at the tympanums in just a second in more detail. But the tympanum is a lunette over a doorway. Well, let me just go ahead and show you what it looks like. So here's an example of a tympanum. It is the lunette over a doorway, and this is probably the most notable feature of a Romanesque church. The tympanum is really important because it communicates the core doctrines of the church. You will be watching a video on pilgrimages that the link is available here, but also I've posted it on our website. But I just kind of want you to get into the mindset of these pilgrimages. So basically a pilgrimage is a holy journey that people take, and they are traveling sometimes for months. And remember, when we say traveling, it's not like they're just going to hop in their car that has like their nice DVD player so that the kids aren't yelling in the back. No, these people don't even own horses or donkeys or anything like that. So they are straight hoofing it. They are walking from wherever they live to these cathedrals. And again, sometimes it could take months to get there. So they abandon whatever they're doing, like their agriculture, whatever their means of living is. They abandon that and they walk these long distances to these churches. And it's not like on the side of the road they can stop to get something to eat. There's not really any restaurants during this time. There's no hotels. There's nowhere to stay, so they're sleeping outside. They're eating whatever they brought with them or whatever they can get on the way. Not stopping at McDonald's. They finally get here and they're hungry and they're tired, and they walk up to, they're greeted by something like this. The sculptures here in these tympana are narratives to encourage the pilgrims in generosity. So you walk this really long distance, you get here, and you see this gorgeous church, because of course this would have all been painted, and I think it really would have blown you away. And all the messages on this building are encouraging you towards generosity. So it's images about like Christ is being tempted by the devils, but rejects worldly things. The three magi, or the three kings, bring gifts, and of course, scenes from the Passion. Now, carved portals are a significant innovation in Romanesque art. Complex works which combine biblical narratives, legends, folklore, history, and Christian symbolism. They represent the first attempt at large-scale architectural sculptures since the end of the Roman Empire. By the early 12th century, they are usually depicting Christ in majesty, which means the second coming, the last judgment, and the final triumph of good over evil at the apocalypse. These scenes can all be found in churches in northern Spain, southern France, and Burgundy. The doorways to major Romanesque churches are often called portals, and the most important imagery is going to be in these semicircular, these lunette-shaped tympanums, directly over the door lintel. The lintel is supported by a pier called the trimu, and I bring that up because we are going to look at a sculpture that is on the trimu. We also have the door jambs, because we actually are going to look at some sculptures on the door jambs as well. The shape of the portals of Romanesque churches are actually meant to recall a monument that we've seen before. It's meant to recall imperial Roman arches, so triumphal arches. So here, if you remember this one, the Arch of Constantine. So it's meant to recall them in shape, and also, the triumphal arches are they're representations of Rome's triumph against whoever they were fighting, or just the glory of the empire. Well, these portals are actually serving a similar function. They are meant to represent the triumph of Christ and the glory of God in heaven, and those sort of themes. So they actually are meant to recall these triumphal arches. So a popular theme in Romanesque portal art, especially in the tympanum, is the Last Judgment. And here we can see the Last Judgment on the tympanum on the west portal of the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare in France. And this was produced from 1130 to 1145. Now, we actually get to see something in this composition that we haven't really seen in a while, and that is the use of the hieratic scale. So we remembered looking at that in the Near East and in Egypt, but now here we're seeing it again in the Romanesque period. So Christ is the most important figure in this composition, and of course he is right here in the center, and he is the largest. So that use of the hieratic scale. And here is a close-up of him so you can see it in a little bit of detail. So here he is in the middle. Now he is very static and non-moving. He's not really conveying any motion. He does have his hands outstretched, but he's not really doing anything. He's just kind of static there, unwavering in the center. Now his sort of lack of movement is really contrasted by all the stuff that's going on around him. And of course, remember, this would have originally been painted, so I think it would have really popped out at you and really kind of blown you away. So all the figures around him are twisting and turning, and it really conveys a sense of motion. It really feels like there's a lot of chaos in the scene. So what we have going on is we have kind of ornamentation and figures in pretty much every surface here. What we see is Christ at the center, and he has returned in the second coming. And he is there to judge people for their sins. On one side we have, underneath him we have the cowering, naked human souls at his feet. Maybe you can see that a little bit better here. And we see some angels thrown in, people begging the angels for mercy. So on the left-hand side, we actually have the damned, and on the right-hand side, we have the blessed who are going to heaven. And then, of course, Christ standing here supervising everyone in the middle. Here's a close-up of the damned side, and here's a close-up of the people who are going to heaven. It's a really interesting style. They're very elongated, very stretched out, kind of stylized. People are bent at very sharp angles. Look at this guy's knees here. They're bent at sharp angles. It's very powerfully expressive. And I think it's really very successfully conveying this terrifying urgency of a moment as they kind of swarm all around Christ. Now, the whole object of this composition is to encourage you to repent and to become a good Christian and to remember the sacrifice that Christ made to you. And I think images like these would have been very powerful. Here's Christ at the center again. Now, this is actually from a different church, but I bring this in just to show you some details. First of all, remember this would have all been painted, and so here you can actually see some of the paint left over, or that still survives here. So this is another Last Judgment, and on this one, we see this poor guy's being strung up and tortured. These demon creatures are the ones doing it. I'm not sure what's happening with these two people here, but this demon guy is eating flesh, human flesh. So that does not really seem like you want that to happen to you. So if your choice is to either be tortured like these guys or to go to heaven like these guys, I think the choice is pretty clear. And in fact, these Last Judgment images are an example of religious propaganda. Now, not to say that this is a bad thing, but they do have a specific message. So you have gone on this pilgrimage, you're hungry, you're tired, you arrive at this church, and of course it's vibrantly painted, and you see an image like this, and you see something terrifying like this. When you get to this church, you might have thought originally, oh, you know, God's all right, you know, I should probably be a Christian. That sounds like a pretty good idea. But when you come to a church and you see things like this, you say, you know what, yeah, I want to repent because I do not want this to happen to me. So it is definitely an example of religious propaganda. And this is a change from previous periods. Now they are trying to really motivate you and really scare you into joining the church or you know, becoming Christian, because it is very important to them. Now, I should also mention that the artist of this, we do actually know it's a French sculptor, and his name is Gisele Bertis. And he did most of the work himself, but he also oversaw a group of artists, and he directed the project. He uses a technique called undercutting, and we'll see that a little bit more later.